From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel, a brand new podcast from the Wall Street Journal opinion page. And this, our inaugural episode. And for that, we are very fortunate to have a guest who will be one of the prime movers and shakers of many of next week's biggest headlines coming out of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Michael Whatley, the chair of the Republican National Committee, joins us now. Michael, welcome. I think you're coming to us from Milwaukee. Is that not true?
Yep. We are here for committee week, and we've got an RNC meeting as well, and a lot of prep work that goes into getting the arena and the stage and everything else ready to go. But we are so excited about this convention and the opportunity for us to have 50,000 delegates, guests, and media converge on Milwaukee to celebrate President Trump and the nomination and really roll his vision out for the country.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. I know a lot of the headlines right now are on Democratic disarray, and we'll get there. But I want to talk about Republicans for a bit. And I know this week, the RNC and the Trump campaign, in addition to everything else you were just describing organizationally, you have also announced your themes for the convention. And 4 years ago, I remember there was, and it was heartening to see, a very deliberate attempt to highlight average people in the party, not so much as celebrities, but small business owners and blue collar workers, farmers. The big theme this year, if I understand, is Make America Great Once Again. But it seems to me that maybe you're building on that idea of Americans from all walks of life.
Yes, we absolutely are. And I think, one of the things that we really want to do is not just talk about them, but we want to hear from them. And so for us to go out and identify some people that are coming from every aspect of life and be able to highlight them with speaking slots at the convention just really shows our commitment to this is what we're fighting for. These are the people that we're fighting for. President Trump tends to call them the forgotten men and women, but it really is a huge change in the Republican Party since 2016 of we are now the blue collar party. We're now the working man's party, and we want to represent every family across the country. And it's not just about the elites that we see in New York or in California or frankly, any other coastal, city around the country.
It seems like what you're trying to do as well is with this, because I was looking at the different days and the themes on the days, Make America Wealthy once again, Make America Safe once again, Make America Strong once again. The idea here is to talk about Joe Biden's failures. And this brings up, I think you just put out a platform as well, is the idea to also talk about the future and concrete proposals for how you turn some of this around?
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, this election cycle is such an inflection point, not just for America, but for the world. We're not just talking about the next 4 years. We're talking about the next several decades. I have often compared this election cycle to 1980 in terms of its transformational impact and what it's going to mean when Donald Trump is able to help turn this country around. But the thing that's more interesting to me on this election cycle is we have two presidential terms that we're looking at, right? And this is really an election cycle that's going to come down to strength versus weakness and success versus failure. And we have 4 years under Donald Trump, 4 years under Joe Biden, where we can look at their records and look at the successes and the failures that they've had, and the American people can make a very informed vote. That's never really happened before. And so I think it's important for us to lay out what people should vote for. We all know Joe Biden is doing a terrible job. He's got a 36% approval rating. Kamala Harris is even lower. But we can't just say those people are terrible, because even if you look at the polls, people who have a 36% approval rating for him, he's still getting 45, 46, 48% in the polls. So there are people who would vote for him even if they don't approve of him. We need people to vote for Donald Trump, for the Republicans. And that's really what our platform is about. And that's what our convention about, is putting that vision out of how he's going to restore the southern border, how he's going to restore our economy, and how he's going to restore our standing in the world.
There's the other question, too. You're talking right now about maybe undecided voters who are on the fence. If you look, though, correct me if I'm wrong, you have some unity building to do as well, too. I mean, not long ago, we were having primaries, 20%, 30%, 40% of some voters were pulling a lever for someone other than Donald Trump. And there's been some divisions on policy questions, abortion, Ukraine spending, the Reagan wing versus versus a populist wing. Does this convention actually unify the Republican Party? And if so, how do you do that?
It does. And I would say this. The thing for Donald Trump, when we talk about party unity, is he cleared the Republican primary field in March. It's the earliest that we've ever had anybody clear a contested field in the history of the party. And it gave us very, very important time going into convention to be able to pull everybody together. And so when we now look at his approval rating among Republicans, it's absolutely through the roof, 90% plus. Joe Biden certainly cannot say that about his standing on the Democrat side. And we really are coming into this convention in a much more unified position than we were back in 2016, where at this point we were still trying to dot the I's and cross the T's on the primary. So we feel very comfortable about where we are with the Republican Party and the unity, and you're going to see that coming out of the convention in Milwaukee.
Given Biden's problem, I got to go here. I know you're not going to give me the answer, but I got to ask the big Veep question. Donald Trump, I mean, maybe not this week, maybe early next week. Given Biden's problems, doesn't that maybe present an opportunity? And on this theme of trying to pull people together, is that what's going on the Biden side? Could that be a factor in Donald Trump's own decision making on a Veep nominee? Wouldn't it maybe make some sense to pick someone that not necessarily looks or sounds like Donald Trump, but someone that represents stability and mature judgment at this time when everyone feels as though the current administration is falling apart?
Yeah, look, I think the two things that you really want to take a look at with President Trump and his decision making are, one, who is he going to be able to work with on a day-to-day basis? Mm-hmm. It's very, very important. And two, who can actually step up and be the next president? Because I think if you look at the Democratic side of the aisle right now, if they had a candidate who they felt at the vice presidential level could stand up and lead the party on day one, they'd probably already be making a move. Instead, they have Kamala Harris, who is a lower standing among, the voters in terms of her approval rating, who has been an absolute disaster, as the borders are, that they called her at. And every single task that they've given her, she's failed. And so we don't want to be in that position when it comes time for the next person to stand up if there's a need for it. So the president is the only one who is going to tell us when he's going to make the decision and what that decision is going to be. I'm very excited about it. I think, as we're rolling into it.
You don't know?
I don't know. And I think that's great. And like I said, I think that what we want to do is be able to say any of our candidates, whoever it may be, is going to be better than Kamala Harris. And when you just compare the Republican agenda and the Republican standing versus the Democrat agenda and the Democratic standing today is why we are so excited about this election cycle.
Do you know if it's true that it's down to 3 choices?
Look, I will tell you this. The president is keeping his own counsel on this. There's certainly been a lot of conversation about 3 people, but there's also been conversation about many, many more. So we're all waiting for him to make that announcement.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment. We're back. I'm here with Chairman Michael Whatley, the head of the Republican National Committee. I totally agree with you that if Democrats didn't have their Kamala Harris problem, that they probably already would have pushed Joe Biden to the side. I have to ask you, what do you think happens to Joe Biden? Is he going to get kicked to the curb? If you were a betting man by the end of this week, where do you think things stand?
I really don't know. What's amazing to me right now is it doesn't really matter, because people ask me all the time, what are you going to do if there's a change? Or what are you going to do if he stays in? And the answer is we're going to do the same thing, right? This is not just about the Democrats and where they stand. We know where they stand. It's about Donald Trump. It's about the Republican positions, and it's about making sure that we have informed voters going to the polls. And when we have informed voters, they're going to vote for Donald Trump because he had a much stronger economy, he had a much stronger border, and we had a much stronger standing in the world. And that's not going to change if Joe Biden comes off the ballot, because not one single candidate that's been mentioned, whether Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, or even Kamala Harris, is going to change a single one of those platform pieces that they're running on. All they're going to do is double down on the same policies that Joe Biden has implemented for the last 4 years when he's unleashed the immigration wave invasion that we've seen on the southern border. He's unleashed inflation on our economy and really weakened our standing in the world. Nobody's going to change that from the Democratic viewpoint.
Speaking of platforms, you guys also, this week, this was another big piece of news in advance of the convention. You put out a new one. This is interesting because the last real one was in 2016. You readopted that one in 2020. So this marks the first time in 8 years that the party has sat down, had a good hard think, and come up with a new platform. What are some of the big differences? What should people take away from the Republican Party's positions and then versus now?
The biggest thing is really the length, right? And it's not just the vision, because I think that the Republican vision remains the same. I mean, we are pro-life, we are pro-family, we are pro-Israel, we're pro-America. And that doesn't change. But what we wanted to do was make this a document that's digestible by the American voters so that they can look at this and say, this is a roadmap for how to make America great again. And it's a roadmap that the president is going to follow when he gets elected. And that's really fundamentally different because the platform had been put together and kind of added on to over the course of decades, really. And so this is the first time that we've really kind of stepped back and done a holistic view of how we want to approach this. The thing that I'm very, very proud of is that it really, truly matches up with President Trump's vision for the country and how to move us forward in talking about making America safe again and talking about making us, wealthy again and strong again and great again as a country. That's the path forward for us.
There are some differences, though. For instance, I was reading that the platform is not going to, for instance, have any more reference to federal limits on abortion. That's going to be left to the states. I recognize that that is in part a reflection of the Supreme Court decision saying as much. But are there other changes like that in there, though, that people should pay attention to?
I think the most important things that people care about that they look to the Republican Party for are in there. And while we may say it in one paragraph instead of 5, things along those lines, we still focus on it. And you hit the abortion issue right. We have to reflect the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. I mean, the Republican platform language for decades was all about trying to overturn Roe v. Wade. We spent 50 years fighting that battle. And thanks to Donald Trump, the most pro-life president in our country's history, he put 3 Supreme Court justices on the court. They were able to overturn Roe v. Wade. So what we need to do is have a platform that reflects that reality and talks about how we're going to go forward state by state and have that conversation.
So you sent out a memo back when you were named chairman in March listing your 3 priorities in preparation for this election. Let's just touch on those. One of them was a united front with the Trump campaign, and we've just been talking about that. That seems to be well in hand. Another one, voter turnout. Obviously, a huge emphasis on alternative voting, early voting, mail-in voting, absentee ballots. And we all know, look, D's vote early, R's vote on the day. That's been a disadvantage to Republicans, especially in 2022. In 2022, 2 million more Democrats voted early than Republicans in 24 states. And that made the margin of difference for some candidates who narrowly lost there. So I guess you guys have put this huge investment into bank your vote. What's the update? Are GOP voters buying it, given, sometimes there's been a back and forth about the safety and security of this? How is that going? What are your goals and numbers?
Well, the goals are that we want people to feel very comfortable voting. As President Trump has said, it's great if you want to vote early. It's great if you want to vote absentee by mail. It's great if you want to vote on Election Day. The key is we want everybody to make a plan, and then we want them to execute on that plan to deliver their vote. And so we're going out to folks right now. And our entire grassroots program, we call it Trump Force 47, is to go out and have those very, very critical 5-minute conversations with undecided voters. And when you have an undecided voter that you talk to them and it's from somebody that they know and somebody that they trust, they're exponentially more likely to go vote and vote for your candidate. So that really is the fulcrum for us. That's where we want to spend our time and effort. And so we're working very hard to identify and turn out low propensity voters. We're working very hard every day to reach out to communities that Republicans have not always reached out to. Black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian American voters are coming away from Joe Biden and the Democratic Party by the thousands right now because his economy is strangling them and hurting their families. And so we have an opportunity that we've never had to kind of build those in. So we're focused a lot on the turnout. We feel great about the programs we have. And the early vote, the absentee vote, is going to be a critical part of it.
It sounds like to me that you're making a distinction. The goal here is not necessarily to change the minds of Republican voters who routinely vote on the day, but rather you are aiming these efforts at undecided or, as you said, low propensity voters, getting them to vote early. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we want more voters, right? And so if we have a low propensity voter, somebody that we think will vote Republican if they go vote, but they haven't voted in 4 years or they haven't voted in 6 years, then we need to dynamite that voter off their couch and we need to get them involved. And if they have an issue voting on Election Day, then we want them to vote early or we want them to vote by mail. There are a lot of people that have issues on Election Day, and we would love to get those votes in early. We want to make sure, as you said, we want to bank the vote. But the key is we don't want to cannibalize Election Day by taking those voters and making them vote earlier.
Right.
We want to add to it. And so it's very important for us in every aspect of our outreach efforts, our Turnout the Vote programs, is to get new voters into the polls.
We're going to take another quick break. We'll be back in a moment.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
And I'm back again with Michael Whatley, chair of the Republican National Committee. So your other goal, which you listed in that memo, and it would seem to go hand in hand with this, is entwined with the get out the vote, and that was election integrity. And it seems as though what you're trying to do is take a proactive rather than reactive approach. I think one of the lessons, obviously, of 2020 was that there were a lot of lawyers ready after the fact, but a lot of the problems had ended up being baked in because of changes in voting rules, etc. So it seems like you have a focus on making sure there are clear rules of the road. How is that going on a state-by-state basis? Is that the plan? And how do you get that message out to voters that it is okay in some of these places to make use of some of these programs?
Yeah, you hit it right, that you've got to have this conversation before the voting starts, right? And so when we talk about the rules of the road, these are basic protections for election integrity. These are things like only American citizens can vote. That's the law in all 50 states. We need the states to enforce it. We want to make sure that you have voter ID. We want to make sure that states are cleaning up their voter rolls. And when we have mail-in voting, which we do in a majority of states, we want basic protections on the mail-in ballots, right? We want signature requirements, witness requirements. We want them in by Election Day. These are things that are supported by 75, 80% of voters across the country, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. I mean, to me, this is not election conspiracy. This is about election security. So that's very important. The second key component is you've got to be in the room. I think it's so important for us to have observers and attorneys that are in the room whenever a vote's being cast or a vote is being counted. And so we're recruiting 100,000 volunteers nationally. We're looking at 5,000 volunteers in every one of our battleground states to make sure, and we're recruiting and training, that they're in the room, they know what they're doing, and they're able to see and flag any potential issues that we might have. And we've never done that before on a national basis. And we've certainly never done it during the canvass when the votes are actually being counted before on a national basis. So that's really the push that we're having. And the third thing that we're working on is just having this conversation, having a national conversation on the importance of election integrity and making sure that everybody goes out there and signs up to do this. We've set up a new website, protectthevote.com, where we're getting people all the time who are going on, registering. We get them into training, and then we can get them to where we can run the shifts with them. And look, like you said, we learned a hard lesson in 2020. You cannot have this discussion after the election. You've got to have it before.
What worries you the most about what could go wrong on Election Day?
I think that we were always going to be vigilant on the election integrity. I think we're going to be very vigilant in making sure that only American citizens can vote. What we want right now is everybody to recognize that despite the fact that the Democrats have imploded, despite the fact that Joe Biden is in a free fall, despite the fact that he's got a vice president who is even less popular than he is, we still have to get our message out We still have to turn our voters out, and we've got to give those voters a message that they can vote for. And Donald Trump is so good at that, because what he can do is go talk directly to the American voters in a way that I've not seen any candidate really since Ronald Reagan do. And he needs to continue to stay on message the way that he has. He's been amazingly disciplined. But as a party, our job is to make sure that that infrastructure is in place and we're executing to get our candidate across the line. So that's really what keeps me awake at night.
Are you extending the map? Are you guys looking at states now that you hadn't been looking at before? And where would those be?
We are absolutely expanding the map. When you think about Virginia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire were really the first three where we saw that all of a sudden we were tied in all of these polls. We're a point down, we're a point up, and being able to put those on the map. You know, our traditional 7 battleground states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all of a sudden we're running 5 or 6 point margins in Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia. That's very unusual because those have all been nip and tuck between the last 2 election cycles. So we're opening it up. And then since the debate, we're actually starting to see a lot of other states that we would consider to be in play right now. Now, we've got to make sure that this isn't just a blip on the radar screen before we are going to commit to spending resources in other states. But when we're looking in single digits in New York, we're looking at a 3-4 point margin in New Jersey. I mean, these are states that we've not won since Ronald Reagan. So it really is about us playing offense, and the Democrats are playing defense in a very big way.
New Jersey. Wow. Okay. All right. And on the resources, that brings me to my last question. How are we looking on the fundraising front? I know that you guys crushed it in May. The Biden campaign and team came back with a pretty good June. This is going to be a very big dollar election. Do you feel like you have the resources to fight that battle out all the way until November?
We will absolutely have the resources that we need. You know, we know the Democrats are going to have a ton of money. They always have a ton of money. They're going to spend $1 billion across the country over the next 4 months. But we have broken the fundraising records for the RNC and the campaign in March, in April, in May, and in June. We broke the records for the quarter, as you mentioned, $331 million in the second quarter alone. And so we are now at financial parity. We actually are ahead of Joe Biden and the Democrats. That has never happened where you have a challenger outraising the incumbent the way that we are right now. So we feel very comfortable that we're going to get our message out to the American people. And we feel very comfortable we have a better messenger and we have a better message.
Chairman Whatley, thank you so much. It's great to hear all of this and hear your plans and what's going on in the lead up to next week's big convention in Milwaukee. Thank you again for taking the time.
No, thank you. And I think that if I've got just one message for all of your listeners, it's that we are very optimistic. We're very optimistic about this campaign. We're very optimistic about Donald Trump as our nominee. And even more so, we're optimistic about getting America out of the ditch that we're in right now and making sure that we take the opportunity in this inflection point and reset the country for the next several decades.
I think everyone could use some optimism right now. So thank you. And thanks again for taking the time.
Yes, ma'am. Take care.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us this week. We're going to be back in the weeks to come leading up to the election with many more exciting and informative guests. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for this journey.